Thomas Hampson. I'm a classical musician and opera singer. Well, I grew up in the Northwest, in Washington State, in the Tri-Cities. And I grew up in an extremely musical atmosphere. My mother was a wonderful musician and organist and pianist and light opera. And I have two older sisters. And we were raised in a very musical environment. We all studied piano and raised in a parochial school system. So there was a lot of music and singing. I never really thought about one not singing as a person. I've always sung and made music and played the trumpet and played the drums and played the piano and all that sort of thing. Music was just self-understood. But I never really thought about it as being a profession until quite a bit later in my life. And in fact, studied other disciplines, literatures, political science, and have a degree in those studies. And then studied vocal repertoire and musical studies, a bachelor's of fine arts in music. And it was quite a bit later in my early 20s where I thought, well, I'm young, I can try this and see what the study of music and the profession of music are in a lot of ways two different things. And that became clearer in my early 20s. My operatic debut was in fact in Spokane, Washington. I was 19 years old, I think, and by then I was getting a lot of encouragement that I had a proper voice and could be properly trained, but still I was very much not thinking of going into operatic singing as a career. And the local production was Hansel and Gretel, and I sang the father. Shortly thereafter I went to Los Angeles, or actually Santa Barbara, to the summer program at the Music Academy of the West, and that's where I really started to see and study opera in scenes and in sort of in full context. Most people in rural places in this country start probably their association to opera by singing arias, mainly for competitions and trying to find money to study. And it isn't until you get quite a bit farther in your studies and university before you probably are going to be involved in opera in some ways. I was actually in 2 opera choruses before I ever saw a full opera, which was rather extraordinary. The first opera I ever saw was Rigoletto in Spokane, a visiting troupe out from Seattle, and then the other opera I actually got a ticket and went was Sir Geraint Evans singing Falstaff in Seattle. That was extraordinary. But the first 2 operas I was in were the chorus of Così fan tutte by Mozart and Barbiere di Sevilla of Rossini. You tend not to forget being terrified. I enjoyed it a great deal. And of course, being in the chorus was a lot of fun because you knew the people you were working with. But it seemed to be, it was very exhilarating to me, not because I wanted to be on stage and the performing and all that sort of thing. That's not ever really been my instinct, as it were. But opera is such a complex environment of so many different things that are going on in the scenic atmosphere, the psychology of the characters, the historical perspective of the opera, the music, the structure of the music. It's this amazing 3- and 6-dimensional mosaic that happens in real time, and that was very clear to me very at the very beginning, which just completely fascinated me. You get always asked for challenging and favorites, and they're all challenging, and I don't mean that as a glib answer, but every opera, because every opera is a unique slice of a particular perspective, historical perspective and psychological perspective, if not musical style and so forth, they all present a different challenges. Some can be musically very challenging, some can be psychologically more challenging. Certainly something like Dr. Faust of Ferruccio Busoni was a very challenging part for the character and for the music. The stamina necessary in some operas is the challenge. A Mandrika of Richard Strauss, or Guillaume Tell, or some of the Verdi operas, Ballo in Maschera or Don Carlo. There's physical elements to these things that that are very, very challenging. So there is always something that requires a pretty specific amount of energy and attention. The American song and my preoccupation or fascination with song is really this specific dialogue of poetry and music. And when we speak of American song, we really are speaking more of song in America, because, as we well know, America is a nation of many races and many cultural influences. And the astounding fact about arts and letters in America is how creative we've been. I'm not sure we give ourselves as much credit and attention to how consistently and massively creative we have been in telling our story, or telling what it is to be alive now, as Copland so beautifully told us that only composers and poets can do this. That's all they really can do, is say, this is what it's like to be alive now. And when we look at the arts and letters in America, but especially we look at poetry, and poetry set to music, this dialogue, we have a very powerful, beautiful, eclectic diary or narration of being in America, being American, participating in America, becoming more of America, and also as an American, the American creative spirit, which is quite interesting, is that our composers and poets have spent more time writing and thinking and speaking out of what it means to be a composer or poet, as well as to be an American or a composer or poet in America. Both relationships. It's a very fascinating story that's being told, that is wonderfully associative and reaches people across all walks of life and all points of association to their cultural history. And this is what drives me in American song especially. The issues of poetry and music in dialogue with one another is the essential thrust of any song. And the breakdown becomes the epoch, the language, the cultural tapestry from which it's echoing, if you will. I often say it's the eyes of the poets and the ears of the composers. And this narration is what fascinates me endlessly. The fascinating thing about poetic development or language development is, if you take Whitman in the American context, it's fascinating. This guy begrudgingly gets sent off to criticize Italian opera, or be the critic in the audience, or at least some sort of reporter of the events. Doesn't know much about music, doesn't like music very much. Fast forward, 20 years, and he's writing Leaves of Grass. And fast forward another 10 years, and he's writing about having written Leaves of Grass, and says, without my experience in music and Italian opera, I would have not found this new way or my way of expressing in language. And then fast forward again another 20 years, and you have other composers saying that without Walt Whitman's use of language, we would have never developed musical style or form to be more flexible to the actual expression. And that's the thrust of the idea, that as we see song develop, this dialogue of poetry and music, both searching for the proper metaphor of the actual human experience, if you will, you see this, especially in American arts and letters, you see this driving passion to, as Emerson said, let the substance that needs to be expressed tell us how to express it, rather than trying to fit it into a form. So that's probably the most salient difference between Whitman and Foster, or better put, the middle of the 19th century. As we move through the 20th century, we see a deepening of this very, how can I say it, deep relationship of exactly what the metaphor is and what each word stands for, and the word finding its own place in its context and its style, versus having to fit some sort of, iambic pentameter or something like this, The one I'm singing, I don't recite a lot of poetry. I like to read poetry, and I love to hear a great voice or a great mind recite poetry. I don't walk around the house, sort of regaling people with the last poem. Having sung so many songs in so many languages, there are so many beautiful moments. I'd have to. This will certainly be edited out. I'd have to think long and hard to. Some of my favorite poetry is in German. Some of the very brief moments of reflective thought from Walt Whitman, reside with me, but they're all somehow part of the song literature at this point in my mind. A couple of years ago, 2006, there was a very, very profound book that came out called The Long Tail, which essentially, among many other facts and theories in the book, said the world we now live in is providing access points for people to create their own market or their own boutique. And I think this is the profound paradigm shift in especially classical music, because classical music has always been preoccupied with identifying a particular quadrant of the public that will buy or be interested in this recording or this performance. When in fact now our world of podcasts and video podcasts, let's not forget that in 2007 the word podcast was invented and accepted into the Webster Dictionary or something like this. It's an extraordinary fact. So we have the ability through the digital media, which is exploding every week into a different form and getting more ubiquitous, more simple, both for people producing or for better expression, perhaps making permanent that what they do, and those people accessing that and choosing to have that. It is extraordinary the kind of research they're doing and finding in not just in iTunes, but all sorts of fields of how people access music, what kind of cross-genre access people are building for themselves. And you would be surprised how many people that are very passionate about classical music are deeply involved in hip-hop. You would think jazz would be the natural associative, but it is extraordinary what kind of cross-genre associations we're finding in digital media. And even as I'm talking about it, I find myself speaking very much more about how people are accessing what I do, rather than me being preoccupied trying to market something that I do to them. So I think this shift has been very fundamental and very profound, and probably very positive. It has been very difficult for the classical music industry. And that seems to make sense to me, because we spend so much time identifying in the classical musical world, identifying not just the best, the most complete and articulate way that music can say what it has to say. And that, by definition, is somehow antagonistic to the ubiquitousness of the media world that we're building. And we're just at the beginning of this confrontation. I think we'll find a way to ameliorate those issues. But I think it's a very interesting conflict. That's a very important question. Most people probably ingest their music as a background. In America, I know, and that was one of the geniuses of Apple and iTunes, and Steve Jobs specifically, this astounding fact that most Americans, I think something like 40% of all music listening is done in the car. Boom, what an idea. Me personally, I enjoy background radio of various genres. I am an audiophile, so I have a very serious sound system in a room where I do like to go and close the doors and just enjoy that moment, either because it's technical proficiency as an electronic medium or because it's spectacular performance. Being a classical musician, I'm fascinated with how my colleagues, not just singers, but every musician, finds ways to express something else or something new or the same old in classical music. So I'm always in dialogue with other musicians, at least orally, if I can't be with them, and a lot of dead musicians as well. I've learned a lot from dead people on recordings. We've become, in society now, so focused on that which we do, which is our life that we make and our professional or profession or how we pay for our rent or the working side. And then there's the other side. I mean, our lives have become sort of three pieces. There's the grind, there's the period of non-grinding, and then there's the period of sleep. And we're in continual negotiation for those pieces of pie. What becomes problematic is that non-working time is now a time that is either a baseball game or the museum or a concert or a film or a movie or TV or family or vacation. Whereas work has become sort of solidified into some sort of, well, that's what I go do to make this part of my life possible. And I think this is a very, very dangerous schizophrenia that we need to treat. To me, this is one of the great areas that arts and humanities and liberal arts education ameliorate. It ingratiates that the working and the non-working time has a common third ground in there that is teaching one of the other, is amusing one of the other. I think one of the great things behind game theory or game development, especially in education now, apropos digital and new media, is finding a better, easier, more intuitive way to learn that takes that away from the drudge and the structured work part and puts it into the reflective, I'm alive, I'm a human being, I'm not working right now part. And I think that I would like to see music and arts and humanities become more able to even the color spectrum of the fan of activities. And is there a time, if that's really successful, is there a time where you just don't have any of that anymore? Maybe not, but your balance and your choices will be more healthy and more interesting. Is there a time when I just turn it off? Yes. There is a time when there's no music, although there's rhythm, and I find that in the golf course. Although sometimes the rhythm that I need in my swing, as a musician, I find it in another melody, but I'm really stretching right now. There is a time when it's just quiet. You might be interested to know that it is very difficult for musicians to read books with music in the background. We don't do that so much. I shouldn't speak for everybody, but it is very difficult for me to do that. So I tend to separate my activities. Very complex. I probably should. It would be an interesting dialogue with someone why that is. Because some music certainly is not important, and maybe there is a certain. I could turn on the radio, but then it's just distracting. Then it's just another noise element, which I don't particularly want. But when I hear music, I want to engage in it. Even if I engage in it very quickly and turn it off in my mind. If I'm in an elevator, clearly I don't want to be dealing with that. Even if it's Mozart. In fact, especially if it's Mozart. I don't think Mozart belongs in an elevator. I would like to see us return to a deeper, profound relationship to the experience in a concert hall than just I think I'll go look at that. And I think that's part of the digital world I was speaking of earlier that I like very much. We are building such wonderful access points that people have a deeper relationship to the music that is being played in the opera, and in the concert halls or the recitals or the opera. Going to something because it's an amazing event and it's something you've never heard before is part of it. And I don't take that away from anybody. But there are many more rivers underneath that, or wells underneath that river that you're participating in. It's like going to the museum and seeing wonderful pictures that are startling and beautiful, and Renaissance painting is an extraordinary world, and you never need to know anything about it, and you can go and gawk and wonder. And the sense of wonder is the most important part of all of it. But then if you actually do take one of those little, hearing things, or you do know something about the iconography of color, or the iconography of posture, or simply the iconography of the storytelling implied in Renaissance painting, then all of a sudden you have a completely different world that is ingratiating your imagination. It is making you a richer person, and you are participating in a much longer dialogue with historical perspective that enlightens your next steps in today's world. It's exactly the same thing in classical music. Precisely the same thing. The devil is always in the detail. There's so much that goes into a career that has nothing to do with the preparation for having a career, and also has everything to do with how well you prepare in your earliest of days. My only advice as an experienced older singer is about singing, isn't about music. To have a career in music is a completely different question, and needs other kinds of advice and other kinds of experts. All you can do is someone planted in my mind very early on this wonderful truism called "Fortune favors the prepared mind." So all I really can say to a young person who would like a life in music, first and foremost, be clear about what life is. Because whether I'm singing to 3 people or 3,000 people, I'm a happy person because I'm making music. Be passionate about being a musician. There is no limit to how hard you must work and how detailed you must be in every facet of what you do, either as a singer, as a musician, or as a person. Discipline for me is the ordering of the random. It's being very specific about what you do at any particular time. And if you're 20 years old and you're learning, learn. If you're 30 years old, you've learned and you're starting, start. If you're 40 years old, you get the idea. And as a career advice, be prepared for that which you will be asked to do, and you'll be okay. Stay healthy. Oh yes, I think nervousness, a heightened sense of nerves and attention is a very healthy thing for a performer. It is an artificial environment that you're going into, whether it's concert or recital or stage. And I get it, when I know something so well, or I've done it so often, and you kind of walk out for Tuesday night's performance, or you feel like that that makes me more nervous than being geared up. We're a little bit like racehorses, and there is that added edge. The worst. I've never heard that on Think.
Sorry, maybe I should just go ahead and turn
Yeah.
I didn't even know there was a phone there.
In the same way that the horses are always very difficult to get into that lineup, and you can't get it. The worst period of my life, the worst time of my life, is the 10 or 15 minutes before I go on stage. Once you go on stage, you're essentially creating the world people want to participate in. The worst thing you can do, advice to a young musician, is go out on stage with the idea that you're going to communicate something you've learned, and if you do it really well, they'll approve. If you go out in an approval process, you will be so nervous and so preoccupied, you'll never get to the heart of what it is that you want to make music with. People pay vast sums of money to participate in the world of recreated imagination that we spend our waking hours recreating as well as we can, each one of us. That's a blessed life if you're asked to do that, but it's also, I think, a very natural and very beautiful process, both for the public to realize they're going to me, they're coming to me, versus me as an artist trying to convince them of something. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. All I can do is be it, that which the public, or whatever audience it is, wants to participate in. And that may be the most important thing that I could possibly offer as a perspective or advice. What keeps me up at night? I'm a night owl, so studying is what keeps me up at night. What keeps me up at night is that I love to sleep because I need the rest, but I hate to miss something. I would love to be able to take a pill that I wouldn't have to sleep. So sometimes what keeps me up at night is just that I don't want to say goodbye to that day. And at the same time, I love to start the next day. So I think I'm essentially a very unsettled person.